call the meeting to order. We have one member who's not here yet, but I know she's coming. Could we have roll call, please?
Director Reddick, soon to be here. Director Blanchard.
Here.
Director Dye.
Here.
Chuck Penrose.
Here.
Director Stager Carter.
Present.
And Director Lohman.
Here.
Okay, we will have public comment. I only have one card here. I see lots of people in the audience. If anybody wants to speak, please fill out a card.
They're only gonna talk at once.
They're all gonna talk at one, okay. John Zabo.
Thank you. My name is John Zavo. I work here at Sewer Authority Midcoastside. I'm the lead collection guy. Our collection crew's down to 2 of us now, me and one other, so I don't leave much. Anyway, I've got a situation that we're sort of getting tired of. And I just brought the little thingy here. It's Category 1 discharges, SSOs, this is the definition. Discharge of untreated, partially treated wastewater of any volume resulting from an enrollee sanitary sewer system. And it reaches, if it reaches surface water and or reach a drainage channel or tributary to a surface water. Right now in Half Moon Bay, with Mark Thomas being our overlords or whatever you want to call them, watching us, they are telling us when we can and cannot go on a call out when things happen here in Half Moon Bay. Grenada and Montero, we can still roll out and do what we do. What we do is we stop these things from happening. Sewage getting into creeks and the ocean and the storm drains and everywhere else. I know it's all a big liability thing or a responsibility problem. Who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? We feel it's our responsibility to stop that stuff from getting in the ocean. We have the RCD here tonight. They probably would appreciate if we would stop the stuff from getting in the ocean. Maybe in Cupertino, where Mark Thomas comes from, you don't have to worry about it. You dump some stuff in Cupertino, you got time. You dump stuff outside the gate here, you've got about 5 minutes, it's in the ocean. And most times we can't stop. We try to get there as fast as we can. But then we run across ones like it's coming out, I know it's a private lateral, and it's coming out and flowing down the street, heading for a storm drain and or creek, and then to the ocean. And we're told not to go out there because it's a private matter, we don't do that. Well, I just feel that's what we do. So we stop sewage from getting in oceans and creeks and everywhere else here on the coast side. I guess we never did solve the thing about helping out for state park schools and all that was never solved.
Yes, it was.
Oh, it
We
was.
were directed not to help.
Okay, we're not to help. So, yeah, so anyway, that's the kind of stuff that is bothering us. And I don't know if you see, there's a little teeny clock under the big clock. It says 123. That's counting down the days until our contract with Half Moon Bay is over. We check that every day. That's all we got left, 123 days, and then Half Moon Bay can take care of their own sewage, and we don't have to get blamed for it, because eventually we will be getting blamed for it. Sam will be taking the responsibility. Here in Half Moon Bay, I know we're not supposed to do that kind of stuff, we don't. But then I get calls from City Hall and or residents who say they've called the city and told to call us to come out, and the other day, 2 of them, they didn't know where their laterals were. And I'm supposed to go out and help them find them. Well, Mark Thomas might tell me I'm not supposed to do that, that's a private matter. But I go out there when a resident calls and needs help, I go out to help them. That's what we've always done. I don't like this whole Mark Thomas thing, being, like I say, watching over us, telling us what we can and cannot do, when we can and cannot work, when they show up or not. If they don't show up, we're not allowed to work in Half Moon Bay. Like recently, we've had 2 instances now where they're too tired to come here. That's what they're reporting. They had a pump station failure. So they were too tired to come, so now we can't work here. We're in the truck heading out to work, and we're told, nope, gotta go somewhere else. You can't work in Half Moon Bay because Mark Thomas is too tired. What is Half Moon Bay gonna do? I live here in Half Moon Bay. What are they gonna do? What is the RCD and other water places, CWIX and all the state boards, what are they gonna think when they were too tired to come? We're never too tired. I'm on call right now. You call me at midnight, call me at 2 in the morning. I'm out there as fast as I can. We're never too tired to go to work. Anyway, 123 days. If it was up to me and my crew, we're done with Mark Thomas telling us what to do. If Half Moon Bay would like us to keep doing the work for you, we could talk about that, but not if we have overlords or somebody else watching us over at a cost of $186,000. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John, I'll be looking into that. If you could let me know the dates and the incidents that you're talking about, and I'll follow up.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, that closes public comment. We go on to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull anything from the consent agenda?
I'd like to pull item D just to ask a couple of questions.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve items 3A, B, and C?
So moved.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Items 3A, B, and C pass. Item 3D. Director Reddick.
Yeah, so my question is, this says it applies to employees.
Yes.
So are board directors considered employees?
Not for the purpose of this particular policy. We could certainly add some clarifying language if that would make the board feel more comfortable, but the previous policy was directed at employees, and obviously that was how we implemented it.
I just wanted to clarify whether board members were considered under the law or rules and regulations to be employees. Because it does say employees.
Yes.
And I'm fine with that as long as
Yes.
I understand what we are.
Yeah, usually we would say elected officials
Okay.
or something else to clarify that.
All right, that's fine.
I'd like to add that I would appreciate the clarification, because given the, if you just look at our checks, we have FICA
That was my
removed,
question. I was gonna ask the same thing.
and so it could be misconstrued, and I'd love to have Carl review this first.
Review the policy or review the question, the legal question, and whether this would apply?
No, add the exclusionary language about board
Oh,
members.
okay, sure.
And review it in general.
Sure. I took a quick pass through it, and didn't see anything that jumped out at me. Didn't even occur to me that this might try to rope in the board members. I mean, common sense tells you that board members are not employees, they're sort of the employer, and that's the way it is in most respects. The Internal Revenue Code has a different idea, and the IRS has a different idea, and they're sort of a little bit of a higher authority than us in terms of payroll deductions and things like that. But apart from that sort of context, there's a pretty clear distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the policies, I have no trouble with the policy per se, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I'd like the language added. I was just reading an interesting article on estate law and stuff, and one of the things that was said in it was, well, the law changes all the time, so it's up to the heir to be sure that everything is correct. You know, and it's kind of like, no, it's up to the pension agency itself to make sure that things are done well. So I'd like to make sure that we're protected.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to regular business. 4A, first flush presentation. Are you gonna be using this?
Yeah, we will be using
Okay.
the projector, so sorry if
That's all right.
I messed up your seating a little bit.
Happy to move.
It's everything white block.
No problem.
Yes, indeed. If anybody wants a front row seat, I can.
No, that's okay. I'll take a back row seat. That's always my favorite. I'll sit behind Jenny. Sorry. How are you?
It's not right.
Over?
Looking for my cough drops. They're in the easiest place.
Oh, so it's that. Go down.
Can we adjust that so that part of the slide isn't off the screen?
It's off the screen a little bit.
Yeah. Just This looks like it needs to be pulled back on here. Thanks. I think you might need to pull it back a hair, just so no data are off the slide. See how it's going
Push the whole
off?
thing
Pull the
forward.
whole thing, oh, forward, okay.
Yeah.
forward.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There it goes.
Alright, there we go.
Thank
Now
you.
it's on.
Better?
Yep.
Happy?
Alright, thank you for that, sorry. Alright, hello everyone. Thank you for allowing us to be here. My name is Julian Carroll, and I'm also joined by Kelix Nelson and Brittany Bulkey. We're here representing the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. And we're here to present the First Flush 2018 water quality results. So before we actually jump into those results, though, I believe oh, there we go. I believe Kelix just wanted to talk about what the Resource Conservation District is and about some of the work we do.
Sure. I think most, if not all, of the folks here are familiar to some extent with the RCD, Resource Conservation District. But just to make sure that everybody fully understands, the Resource Conservation District is a special district that serves primarily coastal San Mateo County. And the work that we do with First Flush is not the most typical work we do. A lot of our work is providing confidential technical assistance to landowners for the best management of their natural resources in these 4 program areas. We work with water resources in the realm of adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change, enhancing habitat for primarily threatened and endangered species, and providing technical assistance to agriculture for best management of natural resources. First Flush is part of the water quality program that Brittany heads up. Many of you know Brittany. And we have been doing work in this district since the late 1930s. We have a board of directors that's local landowners in our district who provide their priorities. For assistance, they are appointed by the county board of supervisors, and they are not paid, they're volunteer. And we are grant dependent, we function like a nonprofit. We get about $60,000 or $70,000 a year of property tax revenue, and everything else is funded through grant agreements. So that's just a little bit about the RCD as background, in case any of you weren't super familiar with it, and then Julian can tell you about the First Flush results.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if the reception on this mouse is working.
Can somebody advance?
Do you want to see it?
Here,
Can do it from
see
here.
it from here.
The engineer. Probably needs a battery.
If somebody could just advance it for him.
Yeah, that's fine. I can just ask for
There.
slight change painting. Okay, great. So, to start things off, what is First Flush? Well, First Flush is generally known as the first big rain of the wet season. After the dry season, when all these pollutants have had time to build up on the landscape, it's that first big rain where all of that is flushed off and into our local waterways and into our stormwater systems. So it's important to note that for the First Flush program at the RCD, we sample at outfalls to the ocean and not ocean water itself. And the reason this is so important, the sampling, is because generally First Flush is known for its high pollution. You know, again, this is right after the dry season, and this is the first time all of this stuff is making it off the landscape. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So why do we care, and why have we been focusing on collecting this data, every year? So one of the interesting things about First Flush is how large the data set is. We've been collecting this data for many years and across many different locations. And one thing that we do every year is make sure that all of our samples are collected at the same time on the same day, so that we can really start to get these snapshots of what's going on in our local watersheds, and start to kind of piece together, well, what are the pollutants we're worried about, what's going on. And we're hoping that by collecting this data, we can use it to identify problems that are affecting our local watersheds and really allow that data to kind of inform management and hopefully solve any problems that we find. So if you would go to the next slide, please. But before we actually get into the data itself, I'd like to thank some of our partners before moving on. First off, the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, they actually run the larger First Flush program that spans the entire Monterey Bay Sanctuary. So here at the RCD, we only run a small portion of the larger First Flush program. We also want to thank our funders, of course, you here at SAM, and also our other funder, San Mateo County Harbor District. Obviously, we couldn't do the work we do without the funding you provide, so thank you for allowing us to do this amazing work. We also want to thank the Surfrider Foundation for letting us use their lab site over in Princeton as a way to store our field equipment and also as a hub for when the First Flush event is called. And lastly, we want to thank the San Mateo County Public Health System, who every year process our bacteria samples for free. And so that takes a huge weight off of our shoulders as far as funding is concerned, and it's just really a big help. Next slide, please. And of course, we want to thank all of our volunteers who have helped us across the many years that we've been doing First Flush. You know, like I said, we're really focused on making sure that we get snapshots all across the coast when we are sampling. So sadly, with just Brittany and I out there, this wouldn't be possible. So we're really relying on our volunteers to make this sampling happen. So we want to give a huge thanks to everyone who helped out this year as well as previous years. You really make this work happen. And so touching on that a little bit more, one of the things that makes First Flush so unique is that it really embodies the idea of a citizen science, which is really reaching out to the community and involving them and getting them excited about water quality and excited about protecting their local watersheds. And so part of the First Flush program is we actually bring volunteers into our office and conduct a training where we teach them about water quality and its importance, and also sampling protocol, how to collect water quality samples. So after this point, we'll put them into teams, and then we'll assign them to sample sites. And you may notice some friendly faces up there that you recognize. Next slide, please.
Leonard and Keith.
So when our volunteers are put into the teams, we assign them to certain sample sites. And so we had 13 sites that we sampled this year, 6 of which are historic sites. Now you may notice you actually have a handout there so you can follow along in case we shout out a site in particular. And you'll notice that the sites that are underlined are our historic sites. And what that means is that we have consistent data every year for these 6 sites ranging back to 2008. So,
Can I ask a question? What exactly is the El Granada ditch?
So the El Granada ditch is
Is that the drainage through the Burnham Strip?
yes, yeah, right where
The
that.
southern one, through the wetland?
No,
the one in the middle.
the one north of that,
At the bottom of
that has the skate ramp next to it.
Thank you.
No worries. So yeah, once we have all our volunteers together onto teams and we have them trained and we're pretty much ready to go. Next slide, please. We're essentially waiting for the rain. We had a really late First Flush this year, occurring on November 21st. And so, again, I just want to highlight that what we're really looking for when we call the First Flush event is rain that's sheeting off the landscape so that we make sure that we're really capturing all the pollutants that are built up on the landscape. And when we take a sample, we're getting a really representative sample of the watershed that we're collecting from. And so, talking about a representative sample and the pollutants, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about what we sample for. So we have a handful of major water quality parameters that we sample for every year, and I'll just touch on all of these briefly. First off, we have fecal indicator bacteria, which are namely E. coli and Enterococcus. Now these fecal indicator bacteria come from the feces of warm-blooded animals, and so the naming here is kind of important. So obviously fecal meaning from feces, but the indicator is also important. So these fecal indicator bacteria are indicators of harmful pathogens. They are not harmful themselves, and so that's an important distinction to make. Now, nutrients, we sample nitrate and orthophosphate every year as well. Now, and the sources of these are going to come from things like fertilizers, detergents, pesticides, things like that. And these are going to have, lots of impacts to both human health in regards to recreation. For instance, we have algal blooms in the ocean due to these type of nutrients, as well as impacts to the ecosystem, obviously. We sample 3 metals every year, copper, zinc, and lead. And these are really attributed to how much human activity you really have in an area. I mean, you can generally see high levels of metals when you have a lot of like car traffic. Potential other sources are like gutters and roofing, things like that, and it really kind of circles back to maintenance. And lastly, total suspended solids. This is really just how much stuff is dissolved in that water. So namely here we're talking about usually erosion as our main source. And this can have marine organism impacts, mainly to the respiration. All that sediment getting stuck in the gills, nobody's having a very good time. Next slide, please.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are you testing the percent of indicators, for instance, in a given volume of water?
Yes, yeah, so.
So if there's a very, very heavy rainfall and you do your first flush after that, it might be different from a lighter rainfall.
True, yes, definitely. So, yeah, there's a bit of an interesting conundrum there because the more rainfall you have, the more is potentially washed off the landscape, but then also the more potentially diluted it can be. So, as far as this program is concerned, we're not really diving that far into the effects of like the hydrology in the stormwater systems and like how much water could be diluting these samples. It's just not really the purpose of what we're doing here. We're just trying to collect the data and really provide it, and we're not doing that deep of a dive. If that makes
Thank you.
sense. So in addition to the pollutants we test for at the labs, we also train our volunteers to take some physical tests out in the field. And so mainly these are to kind of help inform our data and shed some light on some of the results we get back. So we take transparency values while out in the field, and this is also kind of like a rough field estimate of total suspended solids. Again, how much stuff is in that water. We have pH strips that we test for pH, hardness, and chlorine. We have a cool little handheld device called a hanometer that takes electrical conductivity and water temperature. And also, like I've mentioned before, we just don't have the capacity to be at all these sample sites at once. And so we're really relying on our volunteers to be our eyes and ears out in the field. So anything they see, whether it's trash or bubble buildup, oils, things like that, we really rely on them to notice these things. So next slide, please. So let's kind of take a look at some of the things that we got back from this year as far as the physical test results are concerned. First off, pH, hardness, chlorine, and conductivity. All the values we got back were within expected ranges, so we're not really going to touch on that anymore for the rest of this presentation. But orange color, at quite a handful of our sites, we had orange color in the water. But mostly I want to call out Montera Creek specifically. You can see in the bottom right picture there, it may be a little difficult to see, but that orange line there is actually the creek. It's the water. And so, Montera Creek was just by far the most orange we'd seen among all the sites. And so that orange coloration can be indicative of the presence of high metals, but not always. Kind of requires a bit more looking to determine. But just so you're aware, we have actually forwarded that information and that image to County Environmental Health. So just wanted to let you be aware of that. Moving on, bubbles and foam. We did notice that there were a handful of sites that had significant foam buildup. You can kind of see what I'm talking about in the top picture. And generally you can associate this with detergents and soaps, things like that. Take, for instance, someone washing their car and not really taking care to keep that soap out of the stormwater gutters or the stormwater drains. You can end up with something like that. And lastly, with the prevalence of beach cleanups we have around here, we do expect to see a little bit of trash at a lot of our sites, sadly. But at Cali Avenue, we saw more than we expected, and we figured it was of note. Next slide, please. And now let's jump into the actual results we got back from the lab. But before we do that, I need to talk about a couple things. First off, what a water quality objective is, and the second, what an exceedance rate means. So a water quality objective is a threshold that's set by various entities that determines what level a certain pollutant can be in a body of water depending on what you use that water for. And an exceedance rate, normally when you're talking about exceedance, you're exceeding objectives, it's a good thing. In this case, if you're exceeding a water quality objective, it means that that level of whatever pollutant you're talking about is at a level that's considered not safe for whatever you're using that water for. So to kind of digest that a little bit, our water quality objective for bacteria is human health in regards to recreation. So if you're exceeding the water quality objective for bacteria, that means that you shouldn't be coming into contact with that water. It's not considered safe. So looking at some of these values that may kind of surprise you, that 100% next to bacteria means that yes, every single sample we took this year at all of our sites exceeded the water quality objective for bacteria. Similar for orthophosphate. And we also got a significant number of exceedances for copper and nitrate. And so one thing that we noticed when kind of looking through our data is that a lot of the highest values we got in our results from this year were all sites that were new and we had not sampled before. They were all new sites sampled for the first one program this year. And so let's take a bit of a look at that actually. Next slide, please. So typically this would be where we go into kind of the highlights of our sampling this year. But really we found that our largest highlights happen to be from all of our new sites. So let's just kind of recap some of the things that we found this year that were of note. So Montera Creek had high bacteria and that orange color that I pointed out earlier. And also had some of the highest nitrate, orthophosphate, and copper levels in the history of first flush samples, sampled here in San Mateo County. Roosevelt Drainage had also high bacteria and had a large buildup of bubbles and foam there. And Dunes Drainage also had high bacteria and had the single highest nitrate level in all of the San Mateo County first flush samples to date, as well as one of the highest orthophosphate levels. And so looking at this data, it really highlights how interesting collecting first flush data is year to year because you end up learning so much. You know, again, these are all sample sites that we had not sampled before, and you know, we're not even sure if this data is what had even been collected before. You know, and so it really highlights how much you can learn year to year and how important we think just gathering all this information is. And also, I just want to point out that Poplar and Magellan were two sites that we had planned on sampling this year, but upon calling first flush and going out to the sample sites, we found them to be not flowing, which ironically is actually also useful to us because it's not just important to learn what pollutants are entering the system, it's also important to learn where they're entering the system. And so learning where water is flowing versus where it isn't, it actually provides a lot of good insight for us. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about our historic pollutant results. So this is going to be related to our 6 historic sites that I mentioned earlier, which are 6 sites that we sample every year, and we've been sampling all the way back to 2008. Now, you may notice some similarities to the results from this year. Bacteria, a 97% exceedance rate. So what that means is that across from 2008 up until the present, all of the first flush samples we've taken at these 6 historic sites, 97% of them have exceeded for bacteria, for our water quality objective for bacteria. Orthophosphate comes up a close second at 72%, and you know you can also see we've had some issues in the past or so far with copper and zinc. Total suspended solids has only ever exceeded once at one site in 1 year, but again, still noteworthy. So you may be looking at these values and thinking to yourself, well, that looks terrible, and you know, what could I be impacting that? And you know, if so, what can I do? And I'm glad you asked. So there's actually a lot that an individual person can do to make sure that they're not really contributing in any negative way to the watershed. And so I'm sure all of you are familiar with, you know, the beach cleanups. Everyone knows that trash doesn't belong in our watersheds, you know, so we should be cleaning that up. But in regards to specific nutrients, there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that you're not negatively impacting the environment you live in. So first off, let's talk about bacteria. You know, again, fecal indicator bacteria from the guts of warm-blooded animals. And so here on the coast, we're mainly concerned with dogs, horses, and humans. And so really the name of the game is just making sure none of that fecal material makes it into our waterways. And that seems pretty simple. But one thing I do want to call out is pet waste specifically. I'm sure some of you have seen it, you know, walking along the bluffs on the many hiking trails we have around here. You'll see a dog food bag that had obviously been bagged but left on the side of the trail. And so one message that we're really trying to hammer home here is that it's not just about bagging the pet waste, but you have to dispose of it properly. And really just bagging it, once that plastic degrades, it's still in the environment and it's still a problem. Think of it as a dog poop time bomb. So we're hopefully, not gonna see any more of that, but, we can always dream. Moving on, talking about nutrients, again, this is nitrate and orthophosphate, and again, this is kind of what impacts our oceans, creating red tides and algal blooms and stuff like that. We're talking about fertilizers and pesticides and detergents and soaps here generally. So really the take-home message here is, if you have an area where there's pesticides and fertilizers, just make sure you don't have a lot of runoff coming off of that area. And if you're washing your car, make sure that none of the soap is making it into any system that could flush to the ocean, meaning stormwater gutters, or your local waterways even. Talking about metals, really the best thing you can do with metals is twofold. One, just make sure you know what materials you're using and you know their impacts to the systems, and also make sure you're managing them well. So what I mean by that is, make sure you're not using some type of copper piping that might be leaching into stormwater. And also make sure that, say you have metal fencing or even pressure-treated wood, which some people don't know can contribute. It's really just about managing what you have and making sure there's no type of corrosion. And lastly, total suspended solids, we touched on this earlier. Mainly we're talking about erosion here, and so it's a pretty clear answer that you just want to make sure you don't have a lot of sediment leaving your property and entering any storm drain networks or any natural waterways we have. And also of note is there have been studies that have shown that sediment in storm drain networks can actually not only convey but can also kind of serve as almost like a bacteria breeding zone inside these storm drain networks. So it's another reason to make sure that erosion isn't a problem. And so really the take-home message is that the storm drain networks were meant to convey stormwater and stormwater only. And so whenever something enters the storm drain system that isn't stormwater, it has the potential to have lots of adverse effects to our local watersheds. And so one moniker that we kind of go by is only rain down the drain. And I feel like that kind of sums up everything quite succinctly. Next slide, please. So at this point in the presentation, I would just like to point out that at least everybody sitting at the tables here has a bunch of graphs. And so actually hidden in this presentation is about 18 or 19 more slides that we figured it is a bit more or too much of a deep dive for this type of conversation. So these are graphs of all of our sampling results from this year, and as of tomorrow, you should be able to find this presentation with those graphs available on our website if you want to take a look at those, and we invite you to. And we just want as many eyes on this data as possible. So, but for the purposes of this this meeting, we're just going to go ahead and wrap up here. So, what are our next steps moving forward? Well, we're again, we're really just trying to raise awareness about the importance of water quality. And so we have a few more presentations coming up with these first flush results in the next few months. We have our website where we're hosting the data as well. And so really our main goal is to just spread it as wide as we can and make sure the public, has access to this data and hopefully starts getting interested in the, realm of water quality. Because it really does take a whole community to protect the watershed. And so hopefully by making this data available, we can start to inform practices and hopefully start to see things improve. Lastly, I just want to touch on funding. We did reach the end of our funding agreement with this past year First Flush. So we're hoping to get into a 3-year agreement moving forward. Our current estimates are based off of the cost of previous years as well as cost sharing with our other funders. So, next slide please. Really that sums everything up. Again, we're always really excited when we get to come up here and talk about water quality. We could talk for hours on end about it, but please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. But again, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right
Right.
The information is very useful. However, this step is really preliminary in the sense that the city, the county, coastal commission, they all have to do something about this because potential harm, tourism, to health, to local residents is huge if we don't do something about it. So where does this step lead to better planning, reducing pollution and doing all of that? Some of the comments you've made about you can clean this up, that most people don't really do it for a living or want to do it for a living. So how do we take this to the next step? Because if this community loses its tourism because no one wants to go swim in that water, or the kids get sick playing in the sand on the beach after a rainstorm, it has huge damage potential, so.
Yeah, I think Alex,
Yeah. So, our water quality, the First Flush is one part of our broader water quality program, and our water quality program is one of many efforts that are going on, so you're only seeing a sliver, really, of the pie here. We share our data with those exact entities that you're talking about to inform their management or regulation or their programs. We're a non-regulatory entity, so what we do with this is it guides us in the kinds of technical assistance we wanna provide for people. We've had many years, for example, of providing technical assistance to equestrian operations for the best management of manure, and so that they can be stewards of water quality on their properties. We work extensively with farms and ranches and greenhouses and nurseries, and we've worked with private property owners on stormwater management on their property, pervious driveways and, rainwater harvesting and all sorts of things to implement the best practices that are recommendations driven by the priorities we see in these water quality data. And many of those efforts have been funded by the county or some of the others that you've mentioned. There are a number of regulations in place. Some of the information that we have that guide our priorities are from regulatory driven efforts that the county and others do for their own water quality monitoring that enhances the data set and our understanding of the whole picture. So I can't fully answer your question about what everybody should do, but there are definitely a lot of eyes looking at this, and I think hearing from constituents that this is important to you is a good idea. It certainly guides our efforts. I don't know, Brittany, if you would add anything to that?
No, I think that's perfect,
So, can I just comment on that? So, as far as like the dunes sampling site in Roosevelt, where there's, high like nitrates and things, as a Half Moon Bay City Council person, I would like to know more about that data for those sites. So that we can understand the land use impacts, that sort of thing. So our city manager is here, and maybe we can take a look at that data on your website. But we're doing a project, our RCD and the city are partnering with Post to look at capturing stormwater before it goes into the Seymour Channel. I think you probably know where the Seymour Channel is. So there's definitely water quality impairments out there in Wavecrest. So we're trying to understand those and coming up with engineering fixes actually that'll help solve that problem, as well as the volume of water that's entering the channel. So I think your city council is interested in those problems.
And the county has, the county applied for grants for millions of dollars that they then contracted with us to assist private property owners to improve water quality coming off of their properties.
That was a really interesting presentation, thank you. Board President Penrose asked a really good diagnostic question. You could tell she's a doctor. Because it was not a surprise, given that volume wasn't sort of controlled for in the samples, that our watersheds that produce high volumes, Frenchman's Creek, Pelositos Creek, were not represented in the sample sets. And I'm imagining that that the dilution was probably a significant factor for some of those. I'm wondering whether there might be more diagnostic information if we were to look at the tributaries that lead to those, or if we were able to do analysis with the city's plan to do hydrology and understand what the flows are going to be, so that instead of working with an absolute concentration at a particular instant in time, we can back solve to understand what those are. Those new data points you had were particularly interesting. I noticed some of them were called drainages, and it's important to know that those are actually blue line streams. Roosevelt appears in the 1941 War Department map. I don't know about dunes. But I was hoping to participate and add a couple of tributaries to Pilicetos Creek a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, there wasn't enough bandwidth to support me. I think I went to Surfriders, not to RCD when I was doing that. But I have a feeling, that there's a groundswell of interest in water quality, and we could really expand the diagnostic value of this information by covering tributaries and linking it with hydrology information.
Yeah, definitely. Brittany, maybe you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point, and I think that would be a valuable effort. For the First Flush program, because of the way it's run through the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Program, it has to be a outfall or a creek that's directly entering the sanctuary rather than going further up in the watershed. And the way that they design the program is also so that it can be creeks or even small ditches or even just like these little outfalls that are, sometimes like you saw, not flowing. So a big part of the First Flush effort is actually to characterize what's happening along the coast, not necessarily finding the most intense, biggest, most polluted drainages and then like correlating hydrology. It's more kind of like what is actually going into the Monterey Bay Sanctuary and what is not. What's a trickle, what's a big flow, and collecting samples during the first flush. And knowing that they're very different, like taking a sample at Frenchman is gonna be super different than taking one at West Point Avenue. And that's just kind of something that you accept as part of the program, which is also really focused on citizen science. So I think the First Flush data can be built off of for anybody that wants to look further into like what the precipitation was each year compared to what we know about the hydrology of each of these systems and drawing correlations. But I think what you're saying would be really valuable, but it's just not exactly how this program is set up.
And one follow-up, in the list of warm-blooded animals that you mentioned, and with great deference to your farming clientele, one of the animals that was not listed was cattle. And I know that there are areas within our city and in the county where we have Cullah Farm that almost certainly is a byproduct of cattle. Was that just something that you didn't see, or is it just you only have room for so many animals in the slide? Cattle didn't make the cut.
It's not the art.
Cattle would have been the fourth one.
Yeah.
I bet
Yeah.
it would.
It would have, for sure. I think the reason that you probably thought of those other three is because we actually, through our other programs, we actually focus mainly on San Vicente Creek that flows to the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve, and then San Pedro Creek in Pacifica. And for those, horse, human, and dog are kind of the biggest controllable known sources that we are looking for. But other areas, certainly along the coast, cattle would be probably the fourth thing to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
In looking at this packet that you gave us, thank you very much for giving us all of them. I'm
Certainly.
very interested in the huge variation on some of these pollutants that happen over time
Yeah,
on
definitely.
the historic site. I mean, it's huge factors.
Yeah, they can vary a lot, definitely.
And I'm also curious, you mentioned controllable sources, but there is also background pollution. And I know raccoons who tend to accumulate and have their communal toilets. in things like drainage pipes and so on. Clearly, they're not controllable, but they eat so much human garbage given any kind of opportunity. It's probably pretty hard to differentiate their source of, them as a source of pollution from others. So I will be interested to see how these new sites vary over time as well. And I'm going to, since I'm on Montero Water and Sanitary, I'm going to ask our hydrogeologist who did a study of the Montero Creek area in 1999, what they think about the copper. I will send that to you.
Thanks, I'll get that. I'll join that one.
You can join me?
Yeah.
But it's, because I know I was just up in Upper Michigan and there was a river that was running with reddish brown water, and it turned out it was from the iron in the Michigan area, and I don't think copper is a real common problem in our it's not in our water supply, so it's report, so it's gotta be a surface issue, and I'm really curious to where it could be coming from. There aren't that many copper gutters in Montero.
Yeah, I mean, as Brittany kind of touched on a little bit earlier, we're not really trying to trace back the sources that we find from this study. Although we definitely, you know, looking at the data, it will definitely be interesting to see how these levels vary over the next few years. But as far as the levels themselves and the potential sources, you know, we can't really speak to that. Although, you know, if you do any looking for yourself, we would be very much interested in learning.
So, yeah.
So,
Well, Kellex knows a hydrogeologist very well.
I do know them. A couple things. One is the variability that you're talking about from year to year is part of the reason that it's so valuable to have long-term data sets.
Yep.
Right? Is like, there are so many variables going on at any given point. If you're looking at it once, is this a fluke or is this a trend, or are there changes in trends? And to Brittany's point about the fact that this is part of a larger regional program with the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, it also helps us understand what are the trends or issues that are unique here as opposed to region-wide. You know, what should we be focusing on here, that sort of thing. And the questions that you're asking right now are exactly what we hope would happen, which is that we collect this data set in all of our partners in this community, start asking these questions, allocating resources or doing your investigations and starting to answer some of those questions. Or if you want us to help you answer those questions, perhaps we can, but this conversation right now is exactly what I basically hope First Flush would do. Were you gonna add to that, Britt?
I was just going to agree with your comment about the raccoons, and that's definitely something that we know goes on here. And really, any of the watersheds where we are actually, you know, have an additional program on top of this to investigate the sources, it's clear that there is really high background levels of fecal indicator bacteria from wildlife, and especially, you know, including urban wildlife. So in the open space and urban areas.
I think that's important to note as a footnote somewhere.
Yeah.
Because regulators might come in, and the first gentleman who spoke about, we've gotta do something about this. Short of, all of us starting to wear raccoon coats, I don't think there's much hope, that we can do much about them. They're pretty prolific, cute little guys.
And girls.
Girls, yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Your slide that showed the neighborhood with the 3 little houses and all the pollutants that they're creating, is there an agency, is there a website, is there some place where the general public can go and say, oh gee, this is what I do when I wash my car? Because I don't, it's not your job to come up with solutions, but it would be nice for us to be able to talk to the public and tell them there are some things they can do.
There are, Brittany, you wanna
Certainly, yeah.
mention what those?
Yeah, so there's a website that's called Flows to Bay, and it's San Mateo County-wide pollution prevention program. And so that is a site that is designed specifically to let people know what they can do, and that comes from the NPDES stormwater permit. So the county is required to have that website and to have a bunch of resources and to do events and do all sorts of things to address stormwater. And so that effort is called San Mateo County-wide Pollution Prevention, and they also call themselves Flows to Bay. And so we've been working with them a lot lately, even with you guys, Sam, through Coastside One Water, which Beverly initiated a few years ago. And we've been working more with them to tailor their outreach materials to say, you know, flows to ocean, and starting to include the coastside on their efforts, and, you know, bringing resources from that program out here.
Great, thank you. Could you do me a favor and email me that?
Absolutely.
I don't have a pen right
Sure.
now.
Absolutely.
And then we would
So write
also
it down.
I
ask
can do
you
that.
that with your respective networks, please refer people to us as well to come provide them with direct technical assistance for what to do on their properties.
Well, I'm talking about the simple things, some of the simple
Yeah.
things, like I'm washing my car, well, how do I collect the
Right.
soapy water?
Car wash.
Yeah, that
You know,
website.
how do you do
That
that?
website is great.
Yeah,
Great, flows to bay.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I was gonna add to that conversation, because one of the things that should be coming from us at this stage, now that we're familiar with what happened, is that goes to the next level, maybe to students and schools who are interested about their future and their environment, dog owners who I have a dog, I walk him every day a couple of times, and I pick up other people's poop, and I'm so frustrated that they just don't care. So re-educating them about the importance of picking up their bags and any loose poop that they find, because it does go into the ocean, it goes in, and it's so just sickening to have people, tourists or anybody, locals, walking by and seeing that stuff around, when it's perfectly preventable. But some sort of a program, maybe through pet stores and other ways that we educate how important it is. It's not just open fields, oh great, let's just run our dogs out there
Right.
without any concern.
One of the things that we've also realized is that people who would never, ever leave pet waste at the beach don't realize that when it's in their backyard, that it's hydrologically connected. I myself love my dog, love the environment, and it wasn't until a number of years ago that I started doing this work that I realized cleaning up in my own backyard mattered. And I do this professionally. So I wouldn't expect anybody on the street to know that either. So we actually do have a pet waste outreach program. It also occurs to me that we should poach from your meeting and pass around a sign-up sheet for our newsletter and our alerts around about this for anybody who wants to sign up for that. And maybe Brittany, you can mention what the pet waste outreach program includes.
Sure, it actually includes pretty much a lot of things you just said. So we are in the process of sending out mailers to residents, and so that will be the message will be tailored specifically around picking up in backyards. And then a lot of our more public outreach efforts focus on, like Julian said, picking up, you know, not just the waste but also the bag, and then teaching people that pet waste is a pollutant. So we've hung flyers around town, and we've had a couple articles in the newspaper. We've done cleanup events. We also have been working through this Coastside One Water group with Sam and other agencies to do outreach events at like Dream Machines and the Pumpkin Festival, and we have specific pet waste information there. So we kind of try to make it a really well-rounded approach with all these different agencies, and then a variety of like social media and like print and in-person conversations. So yeah, that program has been going on for the past 2 years, and we're trying to get additional funding to continue it in the future. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
I live out in Montera near what are called the flower fields, which are actually multi-vehicle transporting and dog runs. I don't want to accuse them, but these are groups, because I haven't actually watched, maybe they do pick up some, but these are hundreds of dogs a day just being unleashed into these fields.
Hmm.
And it's in proximity to Montero Creek and some places like those. So I don't know how we can ask them, you know, are you doing it, or we have to go out there and look to see if they're actually, maybe they do clean up, and I don't want to accuse them, but that would be like a high-use area.
Yeah, understood.
We're aware of that site.
Okay.
Great, well, thank you very much.
Oh.
Any more questions?
Well, I had just one more, which is, well, actually two. One is, would it be possible to get just a quick and easy report of pulling together the information on the El Granada ditch, which goes through the Burnham Strip, which we are hoping to turn into a park? So we have that information pulled out of this data. That would be helpful for us to see.
What does that mean?
Well, I think we can do that. We can take, El Granada Ditch is one of our historic sites.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
we
I think
can
it'd be
just,
pretty easy.
You mean just like pull out the data for that and show you the data?
yeah, we can compile
Just give us a
it for
graph
you,
of,
yeah.
you know, what's happened through time on that site. You guys just help clean up the non-natives from that drainage, so hopefully that'll improve something there. My other question is back to the pet waste, because I'm on the stewardship committee for Midcoastside Land Trust, and I know that pet waste and trying to deal with it is a really big issue. And I just want to say, it's great what you do. I know Brittany's got a whole program going, and let's just try to keep that going and get some more funding for it, because it's a really important factor. I think your testing shows that pet waste is a serious part of the pollution of what enters into the ocean from all of our properties.
It is. One of the challenges is that a lot of our pet waste funding historically has been extremely constrained by a particular watershed. Like we can do, here's the lines and you can do outreach in this creek, or in this kind of outreach in this jurisdiction. So the outreach and the education that we'd like to be able to do is broader than that. And people don't just walk their dog in that one spot.
Which is why we come to Midcoastside Land Trust, and any ideas that we have of like, hey, we have this little bit of money for pet waste program, it has some constraints, so maybe, you know, like I just went and talked to the Midcoastside Land Trust board once, spent 1 hour, and then they took that information and, you know, agreed to go do a cleanup, and so that's what we try to do.
And just tell what happened with the cleanup.
Yeah, so it wasn't this summer, it was last summer, right?
Right.
They picked up 40 pounds of pet waste at Waycrest alone, just by Smithfield.
In an area that has pet waste bags, the stations, and so forth.
Bless you.
Just leave.
But Coastside Dog just got, didn't they just have the city of Half Moon Bay install one at Smithfield, like very recently?
I'm not sure, do you know about that?
Could be.
Okay.
Probably. Yes.
On the human waste side, do we have any knowledge or indication of how many homes are on the sewer system and how many are on the septic system? And is there any knowledge about that?
I missed the question.
That's more, these guys know that better than we do.
Definitely.
Well, the other big issue is the homeless.
I was gonna mention that. We have the roving homeless populations, which always camp right next to creeks.
Yeah, those are factors as well.
So that's an issue for the whole community.
Okay.
A good partnership opportunity for us as well is that those private lateral lines, we were formed by private landowners to assist private landowners. So when there's funding for a program like that, we can also work with the private homes on their lateral line issues.
Wonderful.
Thank you. You do great work.
Thank you. I think we need to stop the questions
Yep.
and move on
Sorry,
because of
thank you.
time.
No, no,
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And we're gonna move on to
Thank you.
item 4B, authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for the first flush program in an amount not to exceed $60,000 for fiscal year 2019-20 through 2021-22.
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
So, when I first got here, the First Flush program was being funded year by year, and each year it was being requested in the budget. And so working with Kellex and the board, the request was to do this for a 3-year program so that they would know that it was covered for that 3-year program. And the direction I had received from the board 2 years ago was, yes, they wanted to see this funded for that 3-year program. And so this is the first opportunity to do that 3-year program, which is why I'm presenting it that way. We can fund it each year, but we'd like the commitment already there for that 3-year program so that the RCD knows that they don't have to each year wonder whether or not we're in or we're out. We already commit to
Good
that.
idea.
So that's what I'm asking for.
Okay.
Can I have a motion?
So moved.
A
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you. And we'll move on to item 4C.
Thank you. Excuse me. Less than that. So the 4C is the opportunity for us to have our first look at the operations and maintenance budget for SAM for the upcoming fiscal year. This has been looked at and discussed several times with the member agency managers and the finance committee for SAM. And I've tried to take all the feedback that I've received and factor it into this report. But once again, this is still the draft.
But the finance committee didn't really.
Well, I sent it out in an email because we had met with the finance committee and we had agreed that rather than trying to schedule a meeting to get together, I would send out the information. And then I sent it out last week and I sent it out the previous week to the member agency managers. The member agencies managers and I met on Friday to get additional feedback. We had also had that discussion with them in January, and I met with the finance committee after that. A lot of that focus was on sort of the procedural and timelines of the budget. But the member agency managers have seen this budget several times. And I did send it out to the finance committee. I didn't get any feedback, but I did get feedback on Friday from the member agency managers. John Dottie from the city was there, and Chuck was there from Granada. Unfortunately, there was no one from Montero was able to attend. We spent a significant amount of time, I will say, both in January and at our meeting on Friday, talking about the capital projects. Obviously, that is, I believe the perspective is that there's more discretion in how we prioritize our projects for infrastructure rehabilitation and replacement than the day-to-day operating costs. The day-to-day operating costs seem to be fairly static. Some of it is out of our control. If we have a lot of rain, that can affect especially our pumps, our electricity usage, depending on the concentration of our flows, that can affect our chemical use. So some of it's a little outside of our control. The capital projects, though, those are the ones that we put forward and we recommend. And so I believe that the feedback from the member agency managers is that that's where we have more communication and discussion available to us. In general, the feedback that I received, and Kishan was also there because so much of the conversation centers around the capital projects, is the comfort level is approximately $2.5 million a year. That's the confidence in the member agency managers in what their rate structures can fund, what projects are of a high enough priority, as well as the number of projects that Sam can accomplish in any given year. And so we were asked to keep that in mind as we were putting forth projects for this coming fiscal year. Another issue is that what the member agency managers, at least the two that were there on Friday, would like to recommend is that they don't want to see spikes in the capital funds each year to year. They'd like to see something that's smoothed over. And so one of the requests that was made was to fund the replacement of the remaining segments of the IPS over 5 years, to look at what that would be. So if it was $1 million a year, then it would be $5 million, and then fund that year to year so that it was an even amount. Whether or not we were ready to expend that in any given year, it would be set aside for that. So let's say we're doing the design in year one, and so we may only spend $250,000, but we're still going to bill the $1 million, set the remainder aside, because maybe in year two we spend $1.5 million. So, but then it would even out the assessments to the member agencies at that flat amount. And then the remaining amount of that approximately $2.5 million spending comfort would be spent on other prioritized projects that were not part of the IPS. So that was the recommendation that we received from the managers on Friday. As far as the actual projects, Kishan continues to work on refining that update to the 5-year, the CIP for 5 years, so that we can bring it forward as we discussed in August or September, so it's always driving the budget process. This year we hadn't established that, so we're a little behind that, but we've been looking at the projects for this first year. And interestingly, we've gotten a little bit of a mixed message on, do we go out and assess the need for certain projects, or do we just spend that money on the projects? And we've gotten a little bit of feedback in both directions. So Kishan's gonna continue to refine the recommendations.
I'm sorry, could you just explain that for a minute?
Sure.
You don't wanna figure out whether you need it, one option might be to just go ahead and spend money?
No, we know we need all of them.
Okay.
It isn't a matter of do we need them. We have so many of our assets that have gone beyond useful life and have been well used, and we need to replace them. Some of them are difficult to determine just what state they're in because they're buried. So a pump you can go and look at. Our electrical you can go and look, I mean, you can see the things that are above ground, you can't see the pipes that are below the ground. So for example, one of the big issues for the regional board is the status of the remaining segments of our IPS system. It's because we don't have redundancy, we can't shut it down and do an analysis of it. But we know from the reports that have been done, the general condition of those pipes. However, we've also heard that some of the member agencies would like us to have some assessment done to determine, do they need to be replaced now? Do they need to be replaced in 2 years? Do they need to be replaced in 5 years or 10 years? So we had put that together to do some of that assessment in this upcoming year. Some of the feedback we received from the member agency managers is that they don't want to do the assessment. We already know, we've already had some reports on the condition and use of those lines. We should spend that $250,000 on replacing some pipe rather than assessing the pipe. So we've received both types of feedback, which is the conundrum that Sam often is in, which is we don't get a consistent message from each of the agencies. And so to some extent, that's why Sam has been in a stalemate for some time as to what do we do? It's the chicken or the egg. Obviously, there's no bad way to move forward because we know so many of our assets need to be replaced. Staff would recommend spending the funds on replacing because we do have reports that have been done. And the beauty of this type of industry is the equipment never gets newer. It's always wearing out. So if it was starting to wear out 10 years ago, it's only 10 more years worn out. So if we could put our money into something, of course, there, especially when it comes to that, we would like to replace it. And I know the regional board would like to see us replace it. But there's some mixed feelings between the member agency managers as to the better use of that, if that makes sense. So, right now, we are looking at approximately $2.5 million a year over the next 5 years in the 5-year plan. So about $2.5 million in 1920. That wouldn't be reflected here because we didn't get that feedback from the managers until Friday, and we had already put this forward. This was based on specific projects identified.
So how does that change the numbers here?
The infrastructure projects that we had thought we would be talking about, when I put this together, was about $2 million, so about another $500,000.
Over 5 years?
No,
Per
well,
year.
for this year, because obviously we're only doing a 1-year budget right now. But in looking at the 5-year, what they have asked is that we smooth that over, because the 5-year was like 2 million 1 year, 3.5 the next, maybe 2.5 the following. And so there were a lot of peaks and valleys in it based on scheduling of projects. Are we in design phase, construction phase, what have you?
And what would be the steady amount?
Well, what their request was no more than 2.5 million a year. I can't say that that's necessarily sufficient, averaged out over the 5 years to address all of the projects that we've identified, but that was the feedback that we received, was that 2.5 million was sort of that comfort zone of confidence for what each of the member agencies could support with their rate structures.
But staff has determined that a certain amount should be set aside over 5 years for the CIP, right?
Well,
And is that more than 2.5 million for the next 3 years?
yes,
Who's staff?
Sam staff.
Sam staff is what I'm
Yes,
talking about.
it's, I was trying to think of what the dollar amount was for the total of the 5-year projects, but I know it was more than an average of 2.5 over each year. It was closer to 3. It was closer to 3.
So it would be instructive if we knew what we can't do if we don't allocate 3.
Well, what it means is if we're spending them, so if we, as recommended, or the feedback that was provided, is 2.5 million a year, and $1.5 million of that is being set aside for the IPS projects, the pipelines, then that only leaves $1 million in everything else that needs to be done.
But I don't know what does need to be done, and I don't know what the cost of what needs to be done is.
Which is why right now, I'm only asking for the request and the direction for the 1 year, because obviously we are gonna be bringing the 5-year plan back to you
Okay?
for the board to consider. It just won't be done as part of this budget process. It's going to continue and be brought back to you in July for the full 5 years. We're
Okay.
just looking at the projects identified for fiscal year 19 and 20, this one fiscal year. I'm just giving you the feedback that we heard. We were asked to pare down the projects for this coming fiscal year. We did that. We had it at about $2 million. Then the feedback we received on Friday was a little different than that, and we were asked to even out the amount over the 5 years. So that was a little bit different than the feedback that we received in the discussion that we had in January.
So you were asked to even out the amount over 5 years, so that made it, instead of $2 million this year and $3 million next year, it made it $2.5 million this year and $2.5 million next year, just speaking.
Of those 2 years, yes.
Okay,
And that if we didn't use all of the 2.5 this year, we would send, and it was specifically the managers wanted it segregated out into this amount is for the IPS pipeline project, and this is for the other projects, so that we wouldn't use that money identified for the pipeline projects for anything other than that. And we were basically pre-funding it, knowing that we more than likely wouldn't be ready to do that project yet. We'd be doing the design, but maybe not the construction. So if we didn't spend it all, we would just segregate it out, and then whatever was left of that $2.5 million would be spent on remaining projects.
I have some trouble with that. I remember years past, there was some aggregation of, or saving for funds, and it was used perhaps not the way the board thought it was going to be used. And so the funds were then returned to each of the member agencies. And it has led to problems. I'm concerned about this without seeing a way to make sure that the funds are not only within SAM used for what they are designated, which was the problem before, but also that they are recognized by each of the member agencies as only for those particular projects.
Well, we actually-
You did mention that equipment never gets newer when it's in the ground. My observation is, I've never seen projects ever get cheaper when they're postponed either. And so I'm concerned about, I realize you're not talking about postponing them, you're talking about the normal process of business. But I am concerned about two things. One is the fund management, because if for whatever reason you chose not to renew your contract with us and we got someone else who went, aha, look at all this money, ooh, I can do all of this stuff. And we have new board members who don't quite remember that. Or if the districts forget that this was set out for something and decide to use it for a new swimming pool or something.
Well, we actually have the capability and have, can set aside and segregate funds into restricted capital funds within projects.
Okay.
That is the beauty of this particular software system, and you can track the history of it. So if that were the direction that the board would give, we would segregate those funds out. They would be placed into those specific projects, and then you'd be able to see the history of that. So if somebody came in and looked at that, they could see that money was dedicated to that IPS project. It wouldn't just be sitting there in what you would see as the normal fund balance. And then on the annual audit, the auditor would know that those were, and would report those as restricted funds.
Okay.
No, I'm actually more interested in talking about the O&M current stuff, because I have a lot of questions of trying to understand these huge,
Yes.
fairly large increases in multiple categories, and I'm just trying to get to understand.
Mhm. Are there any, I mean, it's a, I could take a shot at what you might be pointing at, but I thought you might have had a couple of
I have some
particulars.
highlighted.
Yes.
All right, well, just an explanation of, on page 1 of the staff report. Increasing staff to meet, what do you mean by JPA function needs?
Okay, so trying to make sure that it's very clear that we are not requesting staff to do collection services. So we've been asked to make sure that those two functions, what's identified under our obligations to operate under the JPA versus what we do under contract services. So when I refer to.
So this just means non-collection stuff?
Yeah.
You're using that as a term for that?
Well, because that's what the JPA is the treatment
I
of,
just, it wasn't quite.
yeah, that's what that is.
So, a couple things, well, one, you've negotiated a 4% CPI in addition to all the step increases.
I can't talk about that.
That's closed session.
That's closed session.
But it's in the agenda item right here.
No, I have a placeholder there. I have a placeholder. The contract hasn't been approved, the union hasn't adopted it, the board hasn't approved it. I had to put a placeholder of something in there. And that's what I put in there at this time.
Okay.
And the 4% CPI is not the negotiated items, the 4% CPI is services, supplies, things where we typically see increases generated somewhere in the vicinity of CPI. So for example,
But the CPI is 2.7 for this area for the last year,
for what area?
for urban San Francisco.
It depends on which of the CPI indicators you look at, but for some things, it's a little higher. So I'm looking at what do we expect the service contracts to go up, what do we expect the chemical rates to go up, what do we expect the fuel rates, the water rates, the electrical rates, and those are gonna be closer to that 4%.
Yeah, 4.5.
Yeah,
Electrical's gonna be huge.
All right,
so
well, yeah,
that's
Very
why.
small percent of the budget.
Starting on page 3 of the staff report, of the line items of things that we're paying for,
Mhm.
I didn't do the percentage, but looks like 3/4 of them are all going up significantly.
Yes.
It's increased, 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 in a time of low inflation.
We are not seeing that in the types of supplies and materials that we use, we are not seeing that. We are seeing significant increases in fuel, water, electrical, chemicals, all of that. We're not seeing low increases, we're seeing fairly significant increases, and none of those are things that we can do anything about, and they are very directly related to us being able to meet our permit requirements. We have to use water, the water's going up even more so, because not only do we deal with a rate increase from CCWD like everyone else does, we had to have our meter looked at because it wasn't reporting properly and it had been under-reporting. So it is now correctly reporting, which is significantly more than what we had been paying in the past. So there wasn't anything we could do about that. That's reporting what we're actually using.
Okay. Someone else weighing, it just seems like enormous, 43% increases, 37%, 92%, 118% increases in the costs from the 2018-19. I'm just trying to understand this, it just seems,
Well-
81%, I understand the legal services, okay, that one's 81, but it seems out of, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it just seems out of scale from my understanding of what's happening in our economy, and I don't know how to put myself into a position where increases of 43%, 37%, 15%, 92%, 118%, 24% of this is line item after line item in the budget. It just seems like a lot. And
Well, some of that I can help you with. SAM has been underfunded for many years in doing its basic maintenance. And so what we are now seeing and have been seeing for several years is the domino effect of that. And systems are breaking down at an exponential rate. And every time we start to fix something, something else breaks in the middle of trying to fix the break. And so our costs are incrementally increasing. If, for example, we are trying to replace the fire panel that has failed. In doing so, we had to get a permit from the city, which required an inspection from the fire department to make sure that we were up to code. Guess what? We weren't. So now that simple fire panel replacement is going to be, I don't even know where we're at right now. No, I mean the whole thing, the whole project. Just the electrical alone is gonna be close to $100,000. Just the electrical. That's not all the sprinklers that we have to put in, the other systems that we have to do, the panel itself. And there is absolutely nothing we can do. Our fire panel failed. We have to replace it. We are not up to code. All of those things have to be done, and we're seeing that in we saw it in our chemical pump replacement project, where once we started replacing one thing, it wouldn't talk to the next thing, so we had to replace that. Then the electrical had to be replaced because the conduit had failed. It's just a snowball of every single thing that we seem to try and hold together is failing. And it's from years and years of either not being able to do the maintenance, the day-to-day maintenance that needs to be done, or it's exposed to the elements. And a lot of this was put in pre-2000, so you're seeing coming up on 20 years of being out in the open air. And I mean, I'm sure that Tim and Kishan could give you very specific examples of those types of things, but there's only so much we can do to keep them going, and at some point the only thing that's left is to replace them. And some are big things and some are just little things, but those little things add up to a lot of little things.
Well, some things we can do are like, buying cooperatively.
We do, like the chemicals.
That sort of thing.
Mhm.
Request qualifications and proposals more frequently, for services. This is a budget, right? So as we need things, contracts come forward and we'll have a better look at what things actually cost. And then we can look back next year, but this is a budgeted amount. It seems, the amounts I think are probably justified, at least in terms of budgeting. But as long as we have practices in place to minimize those, I think that's okay. I'm more concerned about the additions of a maintenance worker. I need that justified for me to support that. I'm not sure I understand why we need one at this point. And I don't understand quite the 2-year training ramp up.
Well, no, the 2-year training is for operators. The maintenance technician, I have 2 maintenance technicians, and we've only had 2 maintenance technicians for the past 5 years. So let me give you some history. Before the plant expansion, we had 4 maintenance technicians. The plant was expanded by 50%, staffing was cut by 50%. So if it took 4 people to maintain all of the facilities when it was smaller, how were 2 people going to maintain 50% more of it? And at one point, we were down to 1 mechanic.
However, when it was reduced, most of the plant was new.
But it was
So it
only new
didn't-
for a year.
But it didn't need that much maintenance because it was new. So, but now it's old.
But it needed that maintenance because the maintenance standards on those equipment required annual maintenance, even first year. Even the first year, it required the annual, just regular maintenance and attention, which it didn't get the first year, probably didn't get the second year, may not have gotten the third year, and then it just kept going because we didn't have the staffing for it. And so now we're 18 years into that, and for the majority of that time frame, we had only 1 or 2 maintenance technicians where we used to have 4.
Like the bus duct.
like the bus duct was a whole other problem. That was just not having the ability to turn everything off. But the other problem that we have is and I say this with all the love in my heart, but I have staff that are approaching retirement. And they have given 20, 30 years of their life to here. And I don't think I'm going to get more than 5 more out of some of them. And if I do not have my next generation training behind them, we're gonna have this huge vacuum. No matter how much we write things down, no matter how much are in handbooks, and there's a certain amount of it is just experiential. And if I do not start training them now and passing off that knowledge now, both in writing and the on-the-job training.
Are the maintenance people the ones likely to retire?
He's going to retire in less than 2 years, potentially less than a year.
May I say
Yeah.
something? So, one of the maintenance, high probability, less than a year, and the knowledge base that he has, that's gonna walk out the door when he walks out the door. Everything that is in his head, because they're maintenance people for a reason. They're not maintenance people because they like to screw around with computers and write shit down all the time.
Mhm.
They're out in the field, that's what they do.
Okay, so this
But
begs.
there's more.
Okay, all right.
Now, when he goes, and I've seen this happen in the past, because I've been here for a while, our other maintenance guy, he just had a kid, right? So
The other
after
maintenance guy.
the other one, so once this one goes, then we have this other guy who's just starting a family. Now, he almost missed his son's christening this past weekend because he had a call out and there was no one able to go out. So I've seen this happen in the past. Someone that I worked with before, he said, screw this, not doing it anymore. He packed up his crap and he left because he was tired of being on call all the time. Him and another guy, 50% of their waking life, they're on call for this, and it's not worth it. I've been here for 31 years. I'm like here.
Yeah, so
It's
we
not worth it.
currently have 2 maintenance.
Yes, and
We
we
have
would
2.
like to add, so we have a
Okay,
third.
so is this third going to replace the one that's going to retire so that you'll still end up with 2?
Right now, we need 3. As long as we are doing contract collection services, we have to do 3.
Okay, but one of them's gonna retire in less than a year.
And we still need 3, because as Tim said, I have 2 guys, 50% of their life is on call.
So you're really talking about adding 2.
Well, no, I'm adding
One
one.
to replace the guy who would retire and then an additional one. You're talking
Well,
about 2.
when that person retires, then I would fill that vacancy, so that I would have 3. Because between vacations, sick leave, training, and just keeping up with everything, 2 people can't do it.
So one this year and one next year is kind of what you're talking about.
Additionally, it's just the one, because when one leaves, that's a vacancy and we'll fill it. So there'd be a total of 3 going.
Right, but you would hire one now to train, and then the
Hire
other
another
one
one.
when the other
Yes,
retires.
so but the increasing cost, it would not be exponentially increasing another person. It
Right,
would
but I'm
just-
saying, so you have one in this budget, but you're probably gonna add another one in the next year's budget.
No, because that person's already accounted for. This would put 3 in the budget. And actually, it will get less expensive, because more than likely, the person we would hire would be a Pepper person. And the person that's retiring is a Classic. So that's about a 30% PERS rate savings, because it's 6 3/4 for a Pepper employee, and it's approximately 32% for a Classic. So as we go through this, we're seeing that it is a decreasing amount, because we are getting the newer people in and they're at the lower rate. But we can't subsist on 2 anymore. We've been doing it, and the one who's thinking about retiring and planning for retirement did it for 18 months by himself,
Yeah, one person. And
on
we got-
call
we got
for 18
nothing
months.
but
And they're burnt out.
Okay.
And, I don't wanna wait till I have no one and then hire someone. And so this is that succession planning.
Okay. Another concern I have is that we're talking about engineering services under the O&M budget, and it really belongs in the capital budget. And these are engineering services for specific projects. It even calls that out as design and project management for priority one projects. So in my world in doing projects, you know, your engineering services for projects are budgeted as part of the project budget.
And these
They're
are.
not- Okay, well, it looks like it's part of the operations budget and not
Well,
part of a capital
Operations and maintenance is our budget. That is the general budget for SAM. Not to get into the fine level distinction of capital P project versus little p project. But we had this discussion and with the finance committee, and I asked the finance committee at that time, because I had gotten feedback from the member agency managers, that they want to put the engineering services under infrastructure projects. And I said.
Where I believe it belongs.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
except for, it is segregated out when you go to the infrastructure division. You can see what that is, and I was definitively told by the finance committee to keep it segregated. So now
I
I'm
don't
hearing.
recall that.
Okay.
I-
That was the direction I was given by the finance committee,
Yeah,
was
I
to
don't.
report,
Yeah.
because previous years, the board has been very clear, they wanted to see how much engineering costs there were, and they didn't want it buried in the infrastructure projects.
But it's
But-
part of infrastructure projects though.
But it can be
belongs.
pulled out and identified, but it needs to be there with the project that it's.
It is.
When we're talking about project cost, I wanna know that all the components of that project
Right.
are part of that estimate.
And they are, and if you look on the infrastructure page, which is 125 of the packet, you see the infrastructure budget, and it shows $110,000 of engineering services, or excuse me, $195,000 of engineering services, and the total of all of those project costs is 2.85.
So the increase in engineering services of 129% is because we're doing more infrastructure projects or because we're pulling it out of?
No, it's because we're doing projects that we anticipate, and some of this is because some of the projects that we are looking to do is the design component. So when you're doing the design component, it's more heavier on the engineering side. More of your money is gonna be in the engineering because that's the design component. And then the next year, I would anticipate that there'd be more in the construction component because you've already done the design work.
Well, I don't think it should be reflected in the operations budget. I think it needs to be only reflected in the projects budget.
Well, and that goes
It
back.
should be capitalized, that's what I'm saying.
Well, it will be capitalized. That, when we finish a project, the entire cost of the project gets capitalized. As far as accounting purposes, depreciation, all of that gets captured. This is a budget that's after the project's complete. Every dime that gets spent on that project gets capitalized for the life of whatever that infrastructure asset is. This is, how do we reflect it in the budget? And previous direction has been that there was, and I've been back and forth on this in the three other budgets that I've done. Segregated out, included, segregated out, included, and each year we go back and forth as to which is the preferable way to do it. When it was part of the infrastructure projects, there was a belief that that was hiding how much was being spent on outside engineering, so I was requested to pull it out as a separate line item, so that's what I've done and that's what's reflected here. However, if the board's direction is to put it back under the infrastructure projects, I can do that. But that wasn't the instructions that I had been given previously. So,
The latest said. of instructions.
The latest set of instructions from the previous year's budget, from the finance committee and from the member managers, was they didn't want to see everything lumped together because they wanted to see how much was being spent on outside engineering services, which is why it was segregated out from a budgetary standpoint. And we still have this O&M budget, the general budget that Sam has includes everything, at least until the lawsuit is resolved and maybe understandings are changed as far as the language in the JPA.
So you're saying in a way both is true, that it's included in the O&M budget, but it's also called out in the infrastructure budget?
In the infrastructure division.
Okay.
Director Lohman.
I've had, over the many years, two concerns. That first concern was I would love to see 2 consecutive years with the same budget philosophy. To me, if we can't do that, we don't know what we're doing here. So I'm in favor of locking in a method, and it sounds like as long as everybody in this room and the managers and all of our staffs understand this was the latest and greatest request, so we know where the monies are. You can report out the total project costs, which to me is the biggie. You want to know exactly what everything costs. If we can say, you know, well, we're not giving our approval at this point, we're just discussing it, but I would like to move forward if the managers have asked this. I would like to move forward with this and then also try to keep it for next year and the next year.
Well, this year, the managers have asked me to pull the engineering back into the projects. Last year, it was to pull it out.
So next year, let's all remember, so don't let them pull it back out again next year.
And the other thing is because this is just the draft budget, when you get the full proposed budget, you're gonna get, and you did this year, you get a sheet for every single project that goes behind this infrastructure division. There were 6 projects, and each one of them had their full budget, including engineering services and everything, and each one of them just rolls up into this, which is why engineering got pulled out in the first place, because they couldn't follow the number because separated out in the project, but then it rolled up into something else and they couldn't follow they couldn't trace it from one spreadsheet to the next. So that's why it got separated out.
And that's one of the problems, is looking at budgets from year to year. They make no sense because there's a different underlying structure.
Well, I've had 3 different ones in the 3 years I've been here. Each year has been a different request, so it's the pleasure of the board, it's your budget, so it's how you want to see it. It's just each year it's varied based on whatever the, I think the issue of that particular year was whether it was the emergency projects or, you know, what the issues were.
Well, I've always been in favor of 3 separate budgets, so I haven't changed year to year.
No, and until the JPA language changes, this is kind of what I have, which is we have one general budget.
The last concern I had was about legal services.
Yes.
We had spoken about reducing costs by having legal counsel only participate as needed.
Yes.
And then only call in unless we felt there was a need to actually be present.
Yes,
So
and Carl,
maybe not even, be present at every meeting, but
Right.
on an as-needed basis. And the original budget for coming to each meeting was, I think, what, $90,000. So, given this new paradigm of being more on call, why are we still increasing legal fees?
I anticipate, based on where we are for the existing litigation, that we will still have litigation costs going into the new year. And so I wanted to make sure we had sufficient budget for that. It is a budget, obviously. If that gets settled, it goes away by June 30th, fantastic. Then that is an expenditure I won't need to make. But I didn't want to have to do another mid-year request, since it's something I know right now going into the budget. Last year I didn't know about it when I was prepping the budget. This year I have every expectation that there will still be some costs associated with that lawsuit.
And we'll have an opportunity to talk about status of litigation in closed session.
Okay. So those are basically my concerns.
Other concerns?
Yeah. I'm hopeful that the budget will get passed by all the member agencies on time, as opposed to 2 years ago.
Did everybody sign off on the schedule?
I didn't have all three of the member agency managers to have that discussion on Friday.
And I am also concerned about the construction, the IPS, being approved under protest by one of the member agencies, because that's going to change any predictions for a whole lot of things. And so I'm very concerned about the what we approve here, and then what different things happen at different member agencies or at managers' meetings. And so, other than that, I am not happy that the costs are going up, but I also understand, for instance, the fragility of the state retirement system and how that's got huge costs involved and acceleration.
But we're not even fully funding those pension obligations.
Right.
We
Those,
do have a trust now though, right? A
Not
115
yet.
trust?
not yet.
I thought
Where-
we authorized that.
We had that discussion and then it got sidelined because there were some other expenses that occurred and we didn't have funding for it. So it's, continues to be on my list to bring it forward, much like the reserve policy.
I'd actually rather have us just pay directly to CalPERS as opposed to the trust in any case, but.
Well, as far as CalPERS is concerned, what we had talked about was OPEB for the retiring medical. That trust, not the CalPERS trust.
Okay.
There's one more issue I wanted to bring up. I am segueing into it because there are some implications to the O&M budget. And that is a request that was made by the two member agency managers that SAM continue to provide services to Half Moon Bay for another fiscal year for the collection services. And since SAM basically covers the equipment and other stuff that are necessary to then support the contract services, there are some implications to this budget. And so that was news to me. I was unaware that there was a desire for SAM to do that until Friday. And certainly I haven't put together a budget for Granada and Montera because I've been given no direction to do so. And the
I'm
last.
sorry, I didn't follow that. Can you just?
Collection services?
Yes, I know.
I had put together no budget because the last I heard is that from the member managers was that Montera was going to be doing it, Granada was going with Montera, Half Moon Bay was gonna be using Montera for their emergency services, and they were implementing this. And so I've been waiting for some form of direction from the member managers that something had changed. So then Friday, what the request was that SAM consider continuing to provide services for one more year to Half Moon Bay, because Montera is not ready yet to implement, and there's some time, build-up time, hiring, getting the equipment and such, and that that would not be able to be done by July 1. So therefore, the request was that SAM continue to provide, to offer to extend the contract with Half Moon Bay for another year, and do that so that it would give Montera time to then ramp up for July of next year to take those services on. And so obviously there are implications to SAM from an operational standpoint. And so once again, going back to policy, that would take more than 2 hours worth of effort. And so it's a request from one agency for me to do something. And so I, even though it's only tangentially attached to this budget, I need to know and get some direction from this board. as to what you want me to do with that.
We need to have a more detailed discussion with our staff about collections before I can give any direction.
Well, Montera has sent out RFPs and is doing more due diligence on this, but we haven't made a policy decision that we're going ahead with our own collection systems in any event. So,
There was an RFP?
I may have used the wrong word.
Oh.
We sent out notice to, at least we had directed, let me rephrase
I
that.
think that was
We had
getting ready.
directed staff to do
Oh,
the
oh, I was like-
research and have not heard back. And frankly, I haven't heard whether the research has even been done.
Well, I've received no
Given-
feedback.
Given the
Yeah.
costs involved, I'm I'm searching for the right words, but I think that it would be, it would take a very strong business case to, make our board go in that direction. And I have not seen a very strong business case at this point.
I'll agree with that.
So then, if that's the case, am I supposed to be preparing a contract services budget for this year? I mean, I just assumed no for Half Moon Bay because we had a one-year contract that terminates in 123 days. And so I hadn't even like put any effort into that, and I was waiting.
I'm assuming we're gonna go forward as we have been doing, but we
Okay.
haven't made that decision yet.
Okay.
And I don't have, detail of the conversations of staff internally.
But for the contract with Half Moon Bay to be extended, it would need a board vote, right?
Well, as any contract
Yeah.
would, yes, I would assume it would be much like last year's discussions. And the same goes for the contract services for Granada and Montera. I need to get direction because there's language in the old contracts, not the Half Moon Bay contract, but the other two contracts that says I have to prepare and submit a budget by the end of March for it, or it triggers something on the other side. So I had no direction at all.
So are you looking for direction, from Montera's as an agenda-driven item, or are you expecting it to come from our general manager?
That's an internal process for Montera. I just need to know from the SAM board, which gives me direction, do you want me to expend time, energy, and resources to do so? Last year, the request was direction on whether or not you wanted me to prepare a proposal in response to Half Moon Bay's RFP, which clearly the answer was yes, and so I expended time, energy, and resources and prepared that proposal. This year, I was under the impression that I would be doing something similar for Montera and or Granada, but have not seen anything, so I don't know what the direction is. Sam, are we gonna continue to provide collection services? I mean, that's the question.
Yeah, if only the Montera board president were here, we could do this, but, can we get that on the agenda as because,
I think-
Clemens has been traveling and.
I think that would be a good
I
plan.
think that has to
Okay.
be decided
Alright,
to resolve any kind of budget issues and.
Oh, we need a motion to extend the meeting.
Let's move to extend the meeting for 10 minutes. All in favor?
I'll do that.
And let me just say, for us, we've had no discussion whatsoever of any changes. So
Yeah.
I think your assumption can be that our plan is to continue because it has not crossed our agenda at all.
I wanna leave the budget discussion by just, correcting the impression that Montera representatives are trying to paint for Half Moon Bay that we're not paying our bills. We're paying our bills.
Didn't say that.
That's kind of what was said in Mr. Lohman's op-ed in the newspaper, and that's kind of what you were insinuating, that we're paying under protest, that somehow that's not like really paying.
Well, wait a
We're
minute.
paying our bills, and, we're mostly on time. And I don't think the other agencies can say that they pay their bills on time 100%. So let's, be constructive in our discussions about each other. Thank you.
Let me just say that Mr. Lohman was not officially seated on the MWSD board when he made that, and
Or
so
had
it
any
was,
information that I have now.
so it was not an MWSD, it was a newly elected but unseated.
Okay.
So,
So yes, I just need, so what I think I'm hearing is that you want me to continue to prepare or to begin preparing a budget for contract services for Granada and Montera status quo unless I hear otherwise, and to assume at least at this point that the contract with Half Moon Bay is exactly as it shows, which is ending June 30th, unless I hear something else.
Well, like I said, we haven't had that discussion at the council level. My understanding is I don't see any abrupt changes coming forward, so, but more to come.
well, I am very curious and would like more information. During public comment, there were some comments made that Mark Thomas had deviated from perhaps NPDES permit standards and best practices. And I'd like to hear more about that, because if we were going to extend the contract with Half Moon Bay, Sam needs to be indemnified and protected. Our workers need to be protected, the agency needs to be protected. And if there are reports of this other company being too tired to come and take care of SSOs, or not dealing with SSOs as it would be most appropriate, then as board members, we all need to have information about that to protect Sam.
Well,
Yes,
and,
I've asked Mr. Zabo to follow up with me on the specifics.
Well, I'm
And we
actually
will certainly,
asking,
report back to the
I'm asking
board.
the general manager to do a specific report.
Okay,
Thank you.
as far as the O&M budget, the next step would then be for me to get any additional feedback from either the finance committee or or the member agency managers, and then present this in, I don't wanna say it's permanent state, but in a more formal state, to get approval from the SAM board to then send it to the member agencies for their consideration. Are there any other issues that you want to mention?
well, we had previously discussed in Finance Committee about making sure that the budget is properly footnoted to explain anything that might be confusing for the public, like they see engineering services here, then they see engineering services here.
Mhm.
Is it new money? Are they double dipping? Like, what's going on?
Mhm.
And I think that was actually Director Slater Carter's recommendation, that to make it more readable and digestible, that we have detailed footnotes explaining
Mhm.
process
Yeah,
and explaining assumptions.
transparency makes
Mhm.
life much.
Right.
And we will, like I said, this is the draft format and it's really focused on the financial component to it. And obviously, that more fleshed out process will occur between now and the next iteration. We didn't wanna do a lot of narrative if the numbers were still in flux. So, I guess the two major pieces are the 2.5 million if I'm moving forward with consensus from this board, that the recommendation from the member agency managers to
Smooth it out.
and to look at 2.5 million for this coming year is the direction this board is supportive of. And obviously, the next version of this that you see will have that.
What did we talk about as far as reserves?
We have not brought forward any changes yet because I haven't brought forward a discussion and the finance committee hasn't had a discussion on specifically reserve policies.
Well, I think it's important to marry, a sound reserve policy, with the 5-year approach, $2.5 million, smoothing it out, whatever it is, so that we understand that there's reserves and resources available should there be, emergencies, what have you, so. I think
Right.
that's an important piece.
Right, it's just trying to do that and keeping on time with the budget. It's sort of, one's gonna have to happen after the other.
Yeah, and a meeting or so ago, we asked for a complete revisit of the whole system, who's gonna hold them, the agency's gonna hold it.
Right.
And so we had asked for a complete look at that.
Right, and that was
As soon as we
something
can
that
get
the
it on.
finance committee
Yep,
would be
that'd be
doing.
great.
And I anticipated we'd be doing that at our next finance meeting, which is in April.
Good. Okay, you have enough
So,
direction?
I believe so, yes.
Great. And we will move on to item 4D, discuss the staff treasurer position and provide direction.
I would move that we pursue the direction recommended by the general manager to have the administrative services manager serve as treasurer.
I'll second that.
I would agree with that.
Everyone in favor, say aye.
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 You're the troublemaker with it.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Was that Reddick and
Reddick
then?
and Penrose.
Oh,
Okay.
Penrose? Oh, sorry, I had my head down. Reddick and Penrose, okay.
And we'll move on to 5A, monthly managers report.
You have the report in front of you. We did have a couple of items that we need to bring up that were not included in that because they came up subsequent. So I'm gonna toss that over to Kishan to, or Tim to bring up quickly.
Hello. I don't have mine. Where is this down, I guess? Power outage. There was a power outage on February 16th, and we blew a main. It was the fuse on the pole just between the Francis State Beach and the property on this side leading into the plant. We ended up being on generator for, God, it was over a day, because.
Just to clarify, we did not have a power
No,
outage.
we didn't, it was.
PG&E had a
PG&E,
power
but
outage
since
that
it-
affected us.
Yeah, it affected us, and since we were the only customer, it didn't affect anyone else, and there were a lot of other outages going on.
Yeah.
They're like, well, you're on a generator, right? Yeah, well, okay, we'll get there when we get there, so that's basically what happened. Then the power came back up, and then I think, was it Tuesday? Is that what we said, Kishan?
Yeah.
Tuesday, we had a brownout, so after we had that power outage thing, surge, whatever, then we had a brownout on Tuesday. When we had the brownout, the power faded, it came back, it faded and came back, but the generator never came on.
Oh.
And then we were back on power, and now for our generator to come on, it needs to have a power delay of 10 seconds for it to recognize, and that's just so you don't have the stopping and starting of equipment and everything. So we just assumed that's what it was, but we did notice there were some lights in our main MCC control area for the facility that weren't on. So we contacted Eaton, who is the organization that comes out and does our annual electrical inspections and pulls the buckets out. And they started to investigate everything, and we found out that if there was a power outage, that without manually transferring power over, that the generator wouldn't have kicked in. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so Kishan and I were here until like 7 o'clock that night,
Wow.
waiting for, we had Eaton here, we had Calcon actually had to run down to Santa Clara. This is actually the part, if you guys want to pass it around, this is a
Show and tell.
show and tell. So this is a Cutler hammer relay, and if you look, you can see the burnedness on it.
Gosh.
And this was when the power came back. So this little relay, this crazy little relay right here, little $100 part, basically is what tells the generator to come on. So if this died, which it did, it had a meltdown, if you want to pass it around, the generator wasn't going to come on.
Space shuttle.
Yeah, so now the downside with this particular piece of equipment, the Cutler Hammer no longer makes this piece of equipment. So we had to get a different in-kind direct replacement, no longer Cutler Hammer. Like I said, they no longer make that because it's so old, but there is another company that makes a direct replacement that we were able to get, and we are in the process of getting a couple more that are sitting right there in that cabinet, because we don't want to have to be in the situation where someone has to make a run somewhere in California to get one piece of equipment that is gonna, basically sink us. That one, just because it's a 20-year-old piece of technology.
So what you're saying is, when we're looking at the cost increases in the budget, it would
There
be
you go.
cheaper to get one of these, but by buying 5, it's a 500% increase, but it saves us money in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is not only true for this one little piece of equipment, but even in various areas of the plant, we have Allen Bradley boards for the, what are they? The PLC, that we can't get the Allen Bradley boards for the IOCAT, they don't make them anymore. And these are like, we have the PLCs all throughout the plant that control everything back to the main PLC here. If we can't get those Allen, it's a programmable logic controller. I'm sorry, I know acronyms, I hate acronyms, and I end up using them.
We're running out of time here.
Damn it, I'm out of time.
Anyway,
That's a good
so
story.
needless to say, this was critical, not caused by us, but whenever we are in that situation, we have to run 24/7. Because if somebody has to physically be here to switch us over, somebody has to physically be here to switch us over.
You're right.
But it can't be us.
Yes, it can't be
Because
us.
that's like 16,000 volts. We are not trained on that.
Right.
So we have to pay
I will
the
change
vendor.
an outlet at 110 volts, but I will not do 16,000 volts.
Yeah,
That's good.
So,
Don't do that.
Yes, please don't.
yes.
Can I have a motion
too
to
important.
extend the meeting for 5 more minutes, please?
We've got
What about closed
too.
session?
10 minutes.
I would like to see until 9:30.
All right, 9:30.
9:30.
Okay, you better go fast.
So,
Second?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
I,
All right, monthly manager's report is done. Attorney's report.
I just want to report very briefly, in light of the time, that I had mentioned that CASA was talking about bringing a bill forward to deal with the so-called flushable wipes, which are indeed flushable, but then don't make it out of your private sewer system and mess up public sewer systems. And so right now, there is an assembly bill, it's number 1672, and right now it's just a spot bill. It says it's the intent of the legislature to enact legislation to prohibit the sale or advertisement of any non-woven disposable product labeled as flushable or sewer and septic safe if that product fails to meet specified performance standards. And of course, in due time, that'll all be rolled out, but I just wanted to make you aware of that.
do you know?
Well, then the
who's sponsored
Hertzberg
it?
bill about the outfalls is back too.
It sure is,
Yeah.
it sure is, yeah. I had meant to, I sent around a word that a bill was coming, and then the bill came.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, director's reports.
Just one quick one. We have a chapter meeting, we had a chapter meeting earlier this month of our county chapter of the California Special Districts Association, that's a more acronym. The whole point of that meeting, other than just normal business, was one of our LAFCO reps had left. So we had another election, and I am your new LAFCO rep.
All right, congratulations.
I'm one of the special district reps. There are 2 supervisors, 2 cities, because like Half Moon Bay used to be a city rep, and 1 public member. So it's a 7-person board.
Great. Topics for future board consideration. Anything?
I think we've got a long list of them to
Yes,
get.
but nothing to add to that. Public comment, oral communication. Anything from the public, then we will convene in closed session.